Hello everyone. Today we will take on the topic of clitics. This will be a very in-depth, very thorough, and very grammar-heavy lesson. If you're a beginner and are serious about learning Slovene, definitely stick until the end. No matter how complicated it may seem, believe me when I say it's well worth learning as soon as possible on your Slovene journey. It'll save you a lot of pain down the road. If you're not that serious about learning, that is, if you'd just like to learn the odd Slovene phrase here and there, but don't want to deal with the language itself grammatically, then I would honestly sooner advise you to not watch the clip. Anyway, what I promise everyone is that if you make it to the end, you'll have a very good understanding of this particularly tricky and annoying part of Slovene grammar. You'll see it's easier than it looks, and I'd even dare to bet you'll be able to explain the concept yourself to other learners of Slovene. So, even though we can't avoid the deep linguistic waters, we'll try to keep it as straightforward and as simple as possible. What on earth is a clitic? Clitic is just a fancy term for short, unstressed grammatical word. Actually, we're not interested in the unstressed part at all. They're words that A, are very short, and B, they have a grammatical function. So we're talking about words like her, him, us, as opposed to table, vase, and flower. So why are they important enough to merit our attention? Well, they're very important when it comes to word order in Slovene. They can't be ignored. The sooner you become acquainted with the concept, the better. There's just no way around it. Here's how you can hunt for clitics, so to speak. Open any Slovene news article, or any Slovene text for that matter, and look for commas followed by short words. You'll see what I mean right away. It's not uncommon to find a comma followed by 4 or 5 or even more short words. If you just briefly scan the text, you'll spot them right away. All of these short words after a comma are clitics. For example, blah blah blah, and then da bi yi yo, or something similarly ridiculous. It's not important what da bi yi yo means right now. It's just to give you an idea of what clitics are in practice. Again, they're short words with a grammatical function that are found in bunches or clusters, often after commas. So, among other things, clitics are forms of the verb to be, both for the present and future tense. So, for example, words like sem, je, bom, boš, and so on. Conjunctions, for example, da, ki, ker, ko, and so on. The reflexive pronouns si and se. Short forms of personal pronouns, for example, ga and yo, and so on and so on. There are many more than those on screen. Of these, pronouns are the most important for now. Pronouns are words that replace nouns. He replaces John, and she replaces Joanne, for example. So we said clitics are important when it comes to word order. How so? Well, Slovene is very black and white when it comes to word order, with very little gray area, at least from the pragmatical perspective of the beginner learner. There are two extremes with very little in between. On the one hand, word order in Slovene is very, not to say ridiculously flexible. And on the other hand, it couldn't be more governed by rules and be completely predictable and rigid. That rigid part where one is quick to make a mistake has to do with clitics. Clitics, perhaps to their disappointment, always come second. They're always in second place in the sentence. The only exception is questions, but even then there's either an omitted or implied ali at the beginning in yes-no questions, or else a question word like kje or kdo with other questions. What about if there's more than one clitic in a sentence? After all, we've said they come in bunches, often after commas. Well then, they have a fixed place in the clitic hierarchy. And that's pretty much the main point we'll address in today's lesson. The hierarchy, or the fixed word order of these short grammar words. First, let's talk a bit more about what we mean by second place. Jaz bom kupil vino. I will buy wine. Out of these 4 words, only one is a clitic, and that's bom, which is will or I will, marked with light blue. So let's apply what we've learned so far to get all the possible grammatically correct word orders of this sentence. Rule number 1 is clitics have to be in second place. And rule number 2 is anything else goes. Clitics aside, we said word order in Slovene is ridiculously flexible. And it is. Jaz bom vino kupil. Vino bom kupil jaz. Vino bom jaz kupil. Kupil bom vino jaz. Kupil bom jaz vino. As long as the clitic is in second place, use whatever word order feels most natural coming from your own native tongue. Yes, some of them may sound a bit weird, but they're all perfectly fine. Your focus as a beginner should be solely on clitics. Make things easier on yourself whenever you can. If Slovene word order is so flexible when compared to English, just use it to your advantage. The next point we want to make is that place does not necessarily equal word. One place. We were talking about how clitics are in second place. One place can be one word or 2 words or 3 words or many more. Oh, and by the way, notice that the will and the by parts of will by can be split up. That's completely normal and is often the case in Slovene. The by part, kupil, is not a clitic. That's why we can move it around so freely. Let's start with the same sentence. Jaz bom kupil vino. I will buy wine. Jaz bom kupil belo vino. I will buy white wine. Jaz bom kupil drago belo vino. I will buy expensive white wine. Wine, vino. White wine, belo vino. Expensive white wine, from France for that matter. Drago belo vino, iz Francije. All of those constitute one place, no matter the actual number of words. That's because they form one meaningful unit. Now, how can you check whether a bunch of words is one unit or not? One unit has to answer to one question. The question here is what? What will I buy? I will buy wine, white wine, expensive white wine, and so on. One question equals one unit equals one place. Okay, so that's clear now. One place can be many words. So, going back to the slide where we left off. Now comes the juicy bit, and that's making sense of the clitic hierarchy or sequence, helping you somehow remember the fixed order of clitics if there are several in a sentence. Let's jump right in. Conjunctions. Nai. For the most part, the verb to be in the present tense. The reflexive pronouns si and se. Pronouns, pronouns, and more pronouns, in the third case, fourth case, and second case, respectively. And again, for the most part, the verb to be, this time in the future tense. So 8 positions altogether, which is pretty damn awful. Let's make it easier. The first thing I'd like us to do is to commit the first 2 to memory so that we can eliminate them. So eliminate, or in other words, remember these 2, please. You'll get used to conjunctions being at the very beginning in no time. We really don't need that as part of our table. It's the same in English. You have a comma followed by a conjunction. And simply remember that nai comes immediately after the conjunction. That is, if there is a nai in the sentence at all. It's not that common of a word anyway. Nai is a word that never changes. It's sort of a cousin of the imperative, which is the grammatical form for giving suggestions or orders. Let's not go there now. Just remember these first 2 and ignore them, so we can start counting from 1 again. So now we're left with 6 that we have to make some sense of. Number 1, which we'll go into more detail and explain it in just a couple of seconds, but for the most part, the present tense forms of to be. The reflexive si and se. Pronouns in the dative or third case. Pronouns in the accusative or fourth case. Pronouns in the genitive or second case. And number 6, which we'll explain along with number 1 right away, but again, mostly the future tense forms of to be. 1 and 6 have an important thing in common, and together they build a good starting point and end point to this sequence we're trying to remember. They will function as a frame, clearly demarcating this whole clitic thing both to the left and to the right. So when you think of clitic word order, think this starting point and end point. Use both to remember what's in between. So what do 1 and 6 have in common? Well, they're both the verb to be. In number 1, you will recognize the present tense forms of the verb to be. Notice there's one black sheep, and that's ye, which is he or she is. It's the only one of the 9 forms of to be for the present that doesn't start with the letter S. Now, I don't know how or when or why this came to be, but Slovene ostracized ye and placed it in number 6, along with the future tense forms of the verb to be. So as you can see, group 6 is primarily made up of future forms of the verb to be, all of which start with the letter B, plus the ostracized je. Okay, so we've ostracized je to the right, and additionally there is the word bi, that's bi, on the left in slot number 1, which judging by its appearance belongs in group 6 rather than 1. So, to summarize, first place is reserved for the present tense forms of the verb to be minus the je plus the word bi, that's bi, which is a word that never changes and means would in Slovene. Sixth place is reserved for the future tense forms of the verb to be along with the poor ostracized je. That's about as easy as we can make it. It starts with to be, it ends with to be, and there is one word in each group that doesn't seem to belong there. Now let's go through all of them, 1 to 6, with specific examples. Number 1, words like sem, si, sva, sta, and so on. Number 2, the reflexive pronouns si and se. These words never change. Number 3, words like mi, ti, mu, yi. Number 4, words like me, te, ga, yo. Number 5, words like me, te, ga, ye. Now numbers 4 and 5, so pronouns in the fourth and second case, could easily be represented by one number, could easily be combined into one single group. How come? Well, because the vast majority of them are identical. In fact, the yo-ye difference you see on screen is the only one. For all practical purposes, pronouns in case number 4 and 2 are the same. I'll briefly flash a table to show this on screen, but I'll go back to what we were talking about right away. Pause if you'd like to explore for yourself. So anyway, for all practical purposes, we could have combined items 4 and 5. Let's continue. Number 6. Words like bom, bosh, bo, plus the ostracized ye, and with the exception of bi, which would make sense in this group, but again is unfortunately part of group number 1. So notice that all of the words starting with the letter S are at the beginning, and all of the words starting with B are at the end. That's our split up verb to be. That's our frame. The S's, so words starting with the letter S, always come first, no matter if it's the verb to be or the reflexives si or se, though the reflexives always follow the verb to be if both are present, of course. The B's don't mind coming last. And now that you have a better idea of what's going on, let's show the earlier slide again, this time with the aid of the visuals. To be is on the left at the very beginning, and to be is on the right at the very end, with everything else in between. S is at the beginning, and B's at the end. So by this point, I'm confident you're utterly confused and have no idea what this guy is talking about, and he said the lesson would be easy and straightforward. However, you have learned a bunch of very, very useful stuff already. Stuff that will likely spare you a lot of misery down the road. So take a break, eat a snack, make yourself a cup of coffee, or whatever. Let's mentally reset at this point by reviewing what we've learned so far. Clitics is a fancy term for short grammar words that are always together and come in bunches. You can spot them in any Slovene text right away. Look for commas followed by sequences of short 2- or 3-letter words. Clitics are very important because of word order. Word order is very black and white in Slovene. If we're talking about clitics, there is no leeway whatsoever. For every clitic, there is one single correct spot and one correct spot only in a sentence. If we know the rules, we know exactly where it should stand. All clitics are in second place of a sentence, but if there are more than one, we know their exact position. Any deviation from the rule is a mistake. There are exceptions like questions, but more on that a bit later. This sequence has 6 places. The beginning and end form an easy-to-remember frame that helps us tackle the whole thing. The sequence begins with S words and ends with B words. Let's look at some specific examples to show why all of this is important in specific contexts and how to use it. Take this sentence for example. I visited David. Jaz sem obiskal Davida. Of these 4 words, only one is a clitic, and that's sem. Accordingly, it's in second place. But what if we were to change I visited David to I visited him? Him is he, and he in Slovene is on. However, we need on in the 4th case, and that's ga. And so we replace Davida with ga. But remember, ga is a clitic, so let's color it accordingly. Seeing two clitics split up like this should immediately tell you something isn't right. Clitics have to be in second place, which means they have to stick together. So this sentence is clearly wrong. The only question that's left to answer is where to put the word ga, in front of some or after some. Well, that's easy if you just remember the whole sequence starts with S words. Remember the Superman sign. That makes it impossible for a ga to precede some. However, you can also just check your table to see what exactly is going on. There are two clitics in this sentence, which is why the rest of the spots are grayed out in the table at the top of the screen. One of them belongs to the first group, and that's some, because the present tense forms of the verb to be, with the exception of yeah, of course, are in place number 1. The other is a pronoun in the fourth case, and accordingly, it's in place number 4. The only correct sentence as far as the clitics are concerned is jas sam ga obiskał. However, since jas and obiskał are not clitics, we're free to move them around. Obiskał sam ga jas is also grammatically correct, of course. So basically, whenever you're dealing with clitics of any kind, have the table at the top of the screen at hand and slowly work your way through whatever example you're dealing with. With time, you'll start doing this automatically. So now you know why jas sam obiskał Davida has to change to jas sam ga obiskał, even though it would be much more natural for a native English speaker to say jas sam obiskał ga, which unfortunately isn't correct. Now let's make things just a bit more interesting to show you why this whole thing is so annoying, how quickly it can get much trickier, and why it pays to start getting to know these concepts early in your Slovene career. Jas sam obiskał Davida and jas sam ga obiskał. That much is clear so far. But what about if instead of saying I visited David, we were to say I will visit David? Jas bom obiskał Davida. I will visit David. So we're still going to replace Davida with ga. The only question is the word order, of course. You can pause the video here and think about it yourself if you'd like to. Now we're dealing with places number 4 and 6. Or, to make things easier, just remember that B words come at the very end of the sequence, so you can never say bom ga. The only correct word order as far as clitics are concerned is jas ga bom obiskał. Of course, we can also say obiskał ga bom jas. So, as unintuitive as it is, very similar sentences such as jas sam obiskał Davida and jas bom obiskał Davida, those two similar sentences change considerably once we turn the nouns into pronouns. That is to say, when we turn words that are not clitics into words that are. Jas sam obiskał Davida becomes jas sam ga obiskał. But jas bom obiskał Davida becomes jas ga bom obiskał. Okay, now let's have a look where the word ne fits into the picture. It's pretty simple. Regarding ne, you should just treat it as part of the verb. In the present tense, ne always precedes the verb. Jas ne grem, for example. In the future tense, it always precedes the verb as well, the helping verb to be, that is. So, ne bom, ne boš, ne bo, and so on. For example, jas ne bom šel. And if we're dealing with a conditional be sentence, it precedes the word be. Jas ne bi šel. One more slide on ne. With this slide, we won't go into any detail. We can deal with it in more depth in other lessons. I've decided to add it because I think more advanced learners of Slovene might find it useful. Anyway, to be in the present tense is a clitic. To be in the future tense is a clitic. The negated forms of the verb to be, however, both present tense and future tense, are not clitics. Words like sam, si, je are clitics. Words like bom, boš, bo, and so on are also clitics. But nisam, nisi, ni, and also ne bom, ne boš, ne bo, and so on are not clitics. So you can't start a sentence with si unless it's a question, but you can start it with nisi. Again, more on this in other lessons perhaps. Now let's look at some examples with questions. A si mu povedal? Did you tell him? A si ga vprašal? Did you ask him? Si mu povedal? Si ga vprašal? You can form yes-no questions in Slovene in 3 ways. You can use ali, you can use the abbreviated a, or you can omit both. Ali is very, very formal, a is more common in everyday use, but both are correct. If we omit the ali or a, then clitics can come first, but even then you can imagine an implied a or ali being in place number 1, with clitics following in place number 2. As far as other questions go, zakaj si mu povedal? Why did you tell him? Zakaj si ga vprašal? Why did you ask him? There is a question word in first place, and clitics as usual are in second place. We can replace zakaj with any other question word, of course, like kdaj si mu povedal? When did you tell him? Or kako si ga vprašal? How did you ask him? So this was on clitics and questions. Clitics, however, can also be in first place even if we're not dealing with a question. Here's how. Ne morem, ker se učim. I can't because I'm studying. Gledam film, ker mi je dolgčas. I'm watching a movie because I'm bored. Pijem čaj, ko me zebe. I drink tea when I'm cold. Pijem vodo, ko mi je vroče. I drink water when I'm hot. A main clause is a clause that can stand alone. A subordinate or dependent clause depends on the main clause. The main clause is one level above the subordinate clause, so to speak. In all 4 examples, the main clause comes first, followed by a comma that tells you there's a difference in levels, in hierarchy. So you have a comma, followed by a conjunction, and then everything from 1 to 6 as shown in the table at the top of the screen. However, we can put the subordinate clause first. Ker se učim, ne morem. Ker mi je dolgčas, gledam film. Ko me zebe, pijem čaj. Ko mi je vroče, pijem vodo. So a sentence can not only begin with a clitic if it's a question, but also if it's a sentence made up of several clauses with a subordinate clause coming before the main clause. Also, please see that the subordinate clause is one meaningful unit. How so? Well, we said one unit answers one question. The first 2 subordinate clauses answer the question why or zakaj, and the second 2 answer the question when or kdaj. So if it's one meaningful unit, we can replace it with another meaningful unit, and even a much shorter one. Instead of ker se učim, ne morem, we can simply say jaz ne morem. Instead of ker mi je dolgčas, gledam film, we can say jaz gledam film, and also jaz pijem čaj and jaz pijem vodo. Why am I explaining this? Because replacing words like this can really help you make sense of long, complex sentences. Perhaps more on this along with some other stuff on clitics in future lessons, if anyone will find this lesson useful at all, that is. Well, congratulations to those of you that made it through the whole thing. Just let it sit and then rewatch it as many times as necessary. I'm sure you'll be explaining the wonderful world of clitics to other learners of Slovene in no time. S is at the beginning, 3 before 4, and we said cases 4 and 2 are practically identical, and B's at the end. Good luck, study hard, and aim for the stars.